So this one includes chapter 15, chapters 11 to and including 15, but not including the interlude right after 15. I have gotten to an interlude, but I've not read it. Why? I don't know. I'm almost done, but I wanted to stop just because I feel like there's some stuff I've missed. I don't know. I didn't want to rush through the whole thing. Like some stuff I've missed is the relationship between Mahit and Three Seagrass. Like I should have said in the first video, they're very eager to see each other. If we remember the end of the last book, they seem to have had a very strong relationship, very passionate relationship. And yeah, so they're just so eager to see each other. Like Three Seagrass takes on this mission, goes all the way to the fleet, partially in order that she can pick up Mahit on the way, and they can be back together working to solve some issue. And what I should have said in the last video is when they first meet, or they finally meet up, they're sort of really happy to see each other, but very quickly they sort of start arguing and they have a big fight and their relationship really breaks down. And then that's when you start to realize the whole first book took place during the course of 1 week. So they really have only known each other for 1 week. And so of course their relationship's going to break down and they're not going to be as close and as sort of immediately get along together like sort of they both assumed they would. So I thought that was sort of interesting that despite them seeming like they're so close and they sort of match so well, they don't really know each other that much. They've been through a lot together, and that maybe sort of drew them together, but now that they're sort of not in a life or death situation, although the life or death situation is upcoming, but at first they're not. They're just doing a job together again. They don't have that same dynamic that they did during that 1 week that they knew each other. So I thought that was interesting. But during the course of this book, at least so far, they've really come back together. They have gone down and met with the aliens. It's sort of an extreme environment, a very hot, very dry environment. They've spent hours trying to communicate, I guess verbally, auditorially, if that's a word, with these aliens through singing. And they haven't been able to communicate or learn the language, but they have learned certain words that they've been able to communicate. Mostly nouns, I think. Maybe some verbs, but like no pronouns, no tenses, nothing to give them a language, just very, very basic stuff. But they did get to meet face to face with 2 aliens and didn't get killed. And so they managed to wrap up that that meeting, and agree with the aliens that we'll be back in 18 hours or whatever the time period was. But just because of the elements and their exhaustion, they need to take a break. So they go back up to the ship, they get debriefed, and then they go back to their quarters, and they're sort of running high because, like, in all of not human but takes colony history, there's only been one other first contact meeting with an alien species, the Ebrekti, and that was by the famous Emperor 12 solar flare. Was it 12 solar flare? Solar flare, I think. And now, for a second time, the Tykes colony have met with alien species in first contact, and it was these 2. So they're really running high. They had this huge sort of breakup. Leading up to and during the negotiations, they've sort of helped each other, and they sort of they've gotten a lot closer. So they when they go back to their quarters, their relationship becomes intensely physical for I think the first time. And I thought it was really well written because it wasn't like like titillating or meant to sort of, it wasn't for sort of a viewership, it was, or for the reader to excite, to entice. It was, but it wasn't shying away, it wasn't being coy, it wasn't sort of like close the door and you know what happens next. It was just explained as much as any other portion of the relationship is explained, in as much detail as is needed for the characters, so that we understand their feelings, where they're coming from, what's happening. Um, yeah, I thought it was really well done, in that way. And so they're sort of back together, as it were. Um, However, Mahit, upon waking, is feeling awful because her whole purpose there is to spy and be a saboteur, to ensure that Takes Kalan and this alien species continues to fight sort of in perpetuity until Takes Kalan wears itself out economically, sort of militarily, so that Lysel Station doesn't have to worry about the threat of Takes Kalan. That Takes Kalan will sort of not destroy itself, but through attrition and through a lengthy war will no longer be a threat. So that's Mahit's purpose. She feels awful about that. She wakes up crying. Three Seagrass sees her crying and thinks it's. Eventually, Mahit just explains it all to her, like, look, this is why I'm here. This is my purpose. But I've decided to sort of help these negotiations with these aliens, even though I'm supposed to sort of sabotage them. So yeah, and it's at this point that they get pulled into a decontamination chamber and sort of hosed down and sort of ultra cleaned, because we rewind. They had the Takes Kalan had found a alien corpse before the negotiations had started. They had done an autopsy and investigated it. They hadn't found anything. However, there was one short scene, it might have even been an interlude, where a sort of medical cadet was sort of cleaning up after everything. He's alone, and he sees this sort of fungal growth on the inside the mouth of the dead alien. And so they reach in, accidentally cut their hand on the teeth of the alien, so their glove got cut, and they have an open wound, bleeding, and touch these sort of fungal growths, which release amount of spores. The spores go into the bloodstream, cause anaphylactic shock, and kill this cadet. But before the cadet dies, they manage to send a report sort of to all their superiors that, hey, I found this weird fungal growth on the alien, by the way. Just like casual report, and then they die. And of course, because 20 Cicada is super on the ball, he's on all of these mailing lists. He gets this and immediately goes to investigate and sees the dead cadet in the alien. However, he's exposed himself to this. So he sort of quarantines himself in the medical lab, assumes he's going to die the same way this cadet did. However, we find out that it's not aerosolized. The spores aren't in the air. It's only through contact with an open wound that transfer occurs. However, because they're unsure of how and why, and was this sort of alien corpse sent here as sort of the biological bomb meant to take out the ship, that's why they take Mahit and Three Seagrass and sort of try and decontaminate them, because they had contact with the aliens on the planet. And 20 Cicada sort of thinks he's going to die because he's in the room with the spores. However, it's not aerosolized, like I said. He's okay. He manages to he manages to get out of the quarantine after several hours and lots of tests. And he agrees to go down to the planet for phase 2 of the negotiations, taking with him a sample of the spores to show the aliens, to be like, what's the deal with this? Now, what the spores are really been explained. They sort of grow in the brain as far as we know, and that's why they sort of, when the, I'm going to say, host dies, that's why they sort of spored through the mouth of the alien corpse. So my first thought was cordyceps, like the sort of aliens that they think they're communicating to are really just sort of dead zombie corpse bodies, and it's the fungus that is the actual host, the actual intelligence behind this species. And so that's why we get references in previous interludes to Dirt Home and Blood Home. Dirt Home being the fungus growing in the ground, Blood Home being the fungus growing in a not a host species, in a biological mammalian, reptilian, in an animal species. And sort of that's where we get the sort of the hive mind, the continuation of knowledge, the sort of disregard for individual deaths, and yes, this sort of communal, I don't know how to describe it. The hive mind. It's this fungus that's the true intellect, and the fungus doesn't care if some of its host dies, because it can then release spores that contain the memories of that host, and have those spores injected into another host, or communicate with other species, other aliens that are, you know what I mean? I feel like that's where it's going, but we haven't had that sort of reveal yet, if that is where it's going. So that's sort of the main trajectory of the plot in terms of Mahit 3 Seagrass and the aliens. We also have the sort of political side to the story that I've been paying attention to, but it hasn't been as important to me as the other plot lines. I've sort of been waiting for a reveal, waiting for some kind of understanding, and then everything I'd read will sort of, I'll remember it, and then I can make sense of what's happening. But right now, Nine Hibiscus, the Yautlek, the sort of leader of this whole military expedition, she's just trying her best. She wants to win this war, but she's coming to the conclusion that the Ministry of War wants her to lose it and wants her to die out there, and it's something to do with her relationship with the previous Minister of War, Nine Propulsion, and how because of the coup several months ago, she might still be implicated in that, and they're not sure where her loyalties lie, so they just want to sort of clean shop by get rid of her. She has 16 Moonrise, who's one of the fleet commanders, who's been spending a lot of time on her ship. She determines 16 Moonrise is a third Palmer, meaning she's sort of in the spy, not information ministry, but the sort of the intelligence wing of the war ministry. So she sees her as a threat, but eventually they both come to the conclusion that yes, we're sort of disagree on some things, but we both want to win this war, and maybe we were both sent out here to die, and yeah, so that's sort of the political situation in the fleet. Back home in the Jewel of the World, Teixcalan, Palace Central, we have 8 Antidote still going, sort of wherever he wants, exploring different things, trying to. He's working as a spy on behalf of the Empress, but there's other people in the Ministry of War that are sort of using him, maybe. But he sort of goes where he pleases and is privy to all kinds of information. The one thing he's not privy to is the Minister of War mentions the shard trick as a way to sort of gain control over what's happening in the fleet, at the sort of the where the war is taking place. And it's at that point where 11 Laurel, the spy master's like, hey, do not talk about this in front of 8 Antidote. Like, this is the one thing we cannot talk about in front of him. So it seems like this shard trick is something that the Ministry of War knows about and can use, but the Emperor does not know about. And there was one reference to the shard trick in a previous section with the fleet, and it seems to be the sort of, again with hive mind. If we remember the first book, the Sunlit, the sort of police force, they seem to be run by AI, even though they are individuals. They once they sign up, they seem to somehow become very robotic and sort of become a hive mind controlled by an AI. I think the AI that was programmed by 10 Pearl in the first book. Anyways, that technology they've taken, that they use for the Sunlit, and they've applied to the shard pilots in the fleet, which are sort of individual fighter pilots. So the shard pilots now have sort of a hive mind where they can feel and see what each is experiencing, and that helps them coordinate as sort of a hive or a swarm of insects, even though insects aren't really a hive mind. Anyways, but it seems like the Ministry of War has this technology and has applied it to the shards for some sort of control. They can, in much the way the Sunlit are controlled by an AI, perhaps the shards in the fleet can be controlled by the Ministry of War directly if they feel like the military leadership, the Outlet and the fleet commanders are going against them or something. So it seems like we're going in that direction. But then, I don't know, there's this whole thing about these aliens who have sort of a contiguous memory through all of the sort of individuals that have experienced it. They have sort of a hive mind, and we have that with the Imagio technology, sharing information. No information is lost, no matter who dies. It's all sort of saved and continues on throughout the line. And then we have the shard and the Sunlit with sort of an AI run hive mind. So I'm noticing parallels between Teixcalon and Lysel and these aliens. There's humans and these aliens that don't have names yet. I think we should call them the Singers, but I don't think they have a name yet. So yeah, that's where we're at. Long video, I know. This is why I stopped before I got to the end. I still think, as of right now, that the first book is great, and it is a great stopping point for the story. Like, I don't think this one was needed, especially since it's not. If it was like book 2 in a longer series, then yeah, fine. But the fact that it's book 2 and that's it, there's only book 2, it still seems kind of out of place. But maybe by the end of it, we'll wrap up some stuff that had started in the first book and wasn't quite wrapped up. I don't know. It does seem strange, though, to have a second book like this, which very much feels like a sequel, but then just end it at one sequel. But anyways, that's Desolation Called Peace, chapters 11, I think, to 15.